All right. And then as soon as we are live, I believe we're live. Um,
You're
we'll
live.
start it off here in just a moment. Let a few more people log in. Um, uh, if if you've already logged in, please feel free to put in the chat where you're from. I love to see where all people are logging in from around the world. And we've had a number of people from Europe and Asia, and I just think that's amazing that we're reaching everybody. So, and uh, and if you want to say a little bit something about yourself to let everybody know, that'd be awesome. Or maybe which role is, why you scan buildings, whether it's architecture, engineering, surveying, those sort of things. That's always great for us to hear. All right. My clock says 12, and I like to get it going on time. I'm going to introduce our panelists real quick. So today we have with us, and I'm going to go from order of most facial hair to least facial hair. Of course, I'm Laser Larry, your humble moderator who loves to get on and chat with everybody and go over important issues of the day. Um, Nate Olson is our VP of USID IBD. He's the founder and CEO of Contour, and he's a fellow bourbon lover like myself, and also supposedly a great VR golfer. Um, we have with us also today Derek Carroll, who's at VDCO Tech. He's the VP of VDC, and he's been there or they've been around that company for over a decade, doing scanning and all sorts of VDC services. They're in Southeast Florida, and he loves to spend time on the soccer field with his kids. And then, of course, we have John Russo, who everybody knows and loves, our founder and past president emeritus of USIBD. He's the president of ARC, and they've been going around for almost 3 decades now. And he's climbed higher. His fun fact is he's climbed higher on the Empire State Building than King Kong. So guys, welcome. And I love getting to hang out with you over lunch and to talk about all these great things. Our subject today is really the pitfalls of contracts and great. You can have great data but terrible contracts, and that can cause terrible things, sort of thing. So I want to lead it off with John. And John, can you tell us about some of the amazing things that USIBD has in order to help people sort of hone in on what their contract should be and some of the things that we should be asking clients?
Yeah, no, thanks, Larry. So yeah, USIVD has some great resources, and it's open to everyone, really. I'm going to share my screen here. You can find these things on the USIVD website. Let me get this share going. All right, I think that's working.
We see it.
Okay, perfect. So USIVD.org, if you want to look it up. Some things to point out here on our store. Let's see, under resources, you'll find our bid document series. So we have different documents on here that may help you out with contracting. We've got our flagship LOA, level of accuracy specification. It's probably what we're best known for. We also have all the versions going back. We have a 2D imagery building spec for specifying, your photo imagery and stuff. We've got RFQ, request for qualification template, RFP, request for proposal template. We have a 3D imagery spec. There's some bundles. In particular, if we go back to our LOA, this is a whole page dedicated to LOA. So We encourage you if we do have a certification that you can get your name added to the list of certified professionals that are for your LOA. So I would start there as far as resources go regarding contract documents.
Very good. By the way, everybody, if you hit the chat button on your screen, it'll open up the side panel to where you can ask questions as we go. And if you ask some interesting questions, I'll try to fit them in as much as I can into the talk today with our panelists. Is there anybody on the panel? What are some of the things that you feel like are really important to talk to your clients about before you even start the contract?
I'll just start by saying I always start with intent. You need to define what the intent of the project is. That's always the starting place. Intent defines process. So as soon as you understand what is trying to be accomplished, then you can go about designing the right process, and then that gets memorialized in the contract.
Yeah, I'll add to that too, John, is that I always I tell our clients to start with the end in mind. What is it that their goal is? What are they trying to accomplish? And sometimes what they think they need or what they want isn't always what we end up delivering in the end. Either they want too much detail and there's a cost element to it, is what's their budget for the project, and what is it that they're trying to accomplish at the end of the day. So that's always the first conversation we have, is what are you using this information for? What is this data for?
Yeah, and I would even add to that for some of the more sophisticated owners, have you done scanning on other projects on your site? If so, what were the intent of that? Is that the same intent? Is any of that, previous data still usable? Do you know where it is? What did you learn from that process so we can make sure we do potentially something better or different this time to make sure that data is being used for the future?
Yeah, for me, it was often, who all is going to be using the data. So often an architect would ask for the data for us to go scan a building to get an as-built, and then but they never thought of their MEP engineers or other parts of their design groups that would need the data. And if they wanted us to scan above ceiling, that's it's a crucial part to think about the scope of the contract. Um, uh, were there any pitfalls that like you wish you would have talked to a client about that later on it affected your contracts? Um, like perhaps maybe um, not just accuracy, but scope situations?
I've got one, Larry. It related to accuracy. It was really validating the accuracy is something that wasn't talked about. We thought we were doing good. We had the LOA specification. This was a number of years ago on a previous version of the LOA, and our spec was for LOA 40. It was a real tight spec, which is 16th to a quarter inch tolerance, and which was insane. We were up against some really tough existing conditions. And I'm going to do another screen share here and show you something. Let me grab this.
Yeah, that's a really tight spec as far as trying to fit within over the entire building or site environment, I should say.
So again, this is a free download on the USIBD website. I'm going to scroll down and find this exhibit. And this exhibit didn't exist in a previous version of the LOA at the time we were going through this, and it's in here because of some lessons learned about validation. Basically, we were working with a surveyor who had scanned the space that we were modeling. We were modeling for them, and we were being asked to make sure that all our walls were within the spec. So we were really struggling. Here's a wall, here's a wall. And we were struggling to stay within our 1/4 inch specification, splitting the difference on the uneven surface of the wall. And for the most part, we were able to eke by getting our walls placed. We were using Revit, which is an orthogonal type tool,
Right.
dealing with an out of plumb crazy point cloud. We were struggling to get our walls within that tolerance, and we felt like we did, and then we would do the same thing on this wall, struggling to get this wall within that tolerance. Well, there was no method of validation specified. So when the model was given to the client, they ran out with a disto and they took a shot from this wall over to that wall. And they're like, well, your walls don't match up. The distance doesn't match up in the model to what we took as far as measurements. And well, it's because you got a compounding of error from relative measurements. So in the LOA spec, there's now a spot to specify the method of validation, which is really important. That job, because we didn't have it specified in the contract, there was not a meeting of the minds as to what satisfied the spec. And it cost us quite a bit of money in the end. So,
Yeah, all of us on this panel, we're kind of old dogs, and there was nobody to teach us, so it's all been learned by trial and error and being self-taught for a large part. And so the audience is gaining from our experience of pain. And so I respect that idea, John. Also, with those damn distos, if you're not pointing them exactly straight across, you're actually measuring like the hypotenuse of, something. And so there's a number of ways where that can go wrong. That unless you're measuring like from the center point of a target to a center point of a target on that you can also see in the scans, how the hell do you know? But it's I do feel that pain. Um, uh, Nate, is there anything that you come across as far as things that you really should think about before you even get into the contracts?
I think it's a great segue for John. Is that we started with what's the end in mind? What's the end goal? The next step's really to look at that LOA. I mean, that's a great document to line up with what the expected outcome of the project is. And how do you use and specify in your contract the LOA to match up? So it's such a critical thing to put those two things together. The other thing I wanted to just put out there, just as a disclaimer too, I'm not an attorney. When we're dealing with contracts, it's always a good idea to make sure that the liabilities and other things line up with an attorney. So when we get really technical, obviously, a lot of the attorneys don't have the level of expertise to understand LOA, to understand scan to BIM contracts or laser scanning contracts, but they do definitely understand liability and what happens. So I always find it's a great partnership to have a great relationship with an attorney that can help make sure that those documents are crafted. A lot of times people will use just a AIA contract, for services, and those need to be modified and used. So it's always a good idea to make sure that you consult a legal advisor when dealing with those contracts. But those are great examples. I think too, a lot of people don't know what to put in a contract. A lot of people don't know LOA. So as practitioners, we need to help direct and educate. Like John, you said, how do you validate? I mean, a lot of people don't even think about that. Is how do you validate whether or not you even adhered to the guidelines that you had in the contract? And a lot of times it's a disto where they hire a third party to come out and verify. And when we're dealing with orthogonal tools like Revit, like CAD, existing conditions are never orthogonal. And depending on where the point clouds are sliced, walls tilt in and out, and where the disto measurement is. Not only that, it's the time of day. I mean, people don't realize that late in the afternoon, because of the amount of heat that moves in a building, that building walls actually expand and contract based on temperatures. So when you're dealing with incredibly tight tolerances, those can play a huge and make a big impact on your measurements. So
I love that. All of that. I've felt all of that throughout my career. And Derek, is there anything else you wanted to add before we get into what goes into a contract and some of the important things that you should include?
Yeah, I think even something as simple as file storage. Obviously, when you're dealing with laser scan data, you're talking gigabytes of data. How is that transferred? Who owns where it's being stored? If it's my ACC platform or Procore or other platforms, how long do you have access for it? At what point are you, as an owner, required to then download it and now it's on your end? And then it's also if you are transferring that data, where does that data reside? When is it available to whomever needs it? That seems simple, but I can tell you, I'm sure we've all experienced. Yeah, I have scan data, but it's on a thumb drive. I don't know where it is. It's gigabytes and terabytes of data. Some of it we have, some of it we don't have. The legacy issues when you're talking that amount of data is something that should be at least thought through and included.
Love it.
there's
Yeah.
a cost to that too, right, Derek? And
Yes.
Yeah.
and you said gigabytes. It's often terabytes, depending on the size of the project and how, some of these point clouds, obviously we can decimate and thin them out to some extent, but sometimes you need that resolution. Sometimes you need the denser point cloud. And then one of the biggest storage things for us is imagery, right? So it's
Yeah.
how much imagery, not just the point cloud, but are there photos? Is there video? Are there multiple types of capture device, not just laser scanning? Are you doing a drone? Is there different types? So that comes into play as well.
Yeah. How long you got to store that stuff? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about contracts and what you feel is really important to be in there. Um, as Nate had pointed out, none of us are lawyers. You should probably run your general proposal or contract by a lawyer, but from our experience, there's a number of things that are commonalities that on almost every project you need to get into that proposal or that contract. John, you want to lead us off with a couple that you can think of?
I mean, and this is oftentimes overlooked, even when we're talking about contracts, but insurance is important too.
Oh yeah.
It often gets overlooked. People, sometimes we get to operate under a contract that we put forth. Sometimes we're under a contract given to us by our client. And that's always one of the first things I'll look for is what are the insurance requirements? Because they may not align with what your current policy limits are. So you really need to get that thing sorted out real quick up front.
Yeah.
And then obviously in the body of the contract, it's important to have a really clear understanding of the scope area. Sometimes we show up, we quote a job and, it's the first and second floor. And then we get on site and, hey, there's a basement here. No one told
Right.
us about the basement. Oh, well, yeah, it's not really that big. And it's like, well, we weren't planning on doing a basement. So, something as simple as the scope area, oftentimes, if it's not defined clear, it can cause some problems.
Scope creep is always a thing. And then, one that hit me often was the idea that some middle manager would basically stop us from working and make us come back. And so, what is that, remobilization fee, and what
Mhm.
should that be? What about you, Derek? Can you think of any that you often think needs to be in most contracts?
Yeah, I think even kind of to go on John's point, when you get out to the field and there's a bunch of stuff in the way, and a lot of, our liability isn't to move your stuff. Obviously, you wouldn't want to damage anything of someone else's. So having somebody there that is moving stuff or having the space cleaned up prior to, because then that would dovetail into your remote cost to have to come back because they wanted a storage facility scanned, but it was full of stuff. I think something as simple as that could be added to a contract just to make sure that they understand that laser scanning is sight as seen. It's not the X-ray vision, so it can't see through stuff. So just knowing that, it needs to be a clean, usable space if that's what the whole purpose of the scanning is. So, and then the other thing for certain job sites is if you've got to have escorting or badging,
Oh, yeah.
things like that, all of that needs to be understood and included because there is cost to those, going through that process, the certifications and things like that. So all of that needs to be upfront.
Yes, there's a number of clients that will require you to do on-site training
Hmm.
and waste half a day with your entire team.
Yeah.
And like, if you don't mention up front that you're going to charge them for that, that can be a big surprise. For them, the additional charge, even though they realize that it's their fault, or their policy, I should say. Uh, what about along the lines of adding services like survey control or things along those lines? Uh, does that need to be in every proposal or contract, or at what point do you decide that that needs to be a part of a project?
Uh, I mean, that's a great question. So I I do want to go back for a second if I can, and
Sure.
we might could do a whole episode on insurance. But John brought up some really good points because not only for practitioners, it's a great selling point, right? So sometimes we have insurance limits that sometimes allow us to compete for certain work that other people can't compete for because of the insurance, just the insurance requirements, but not just the limits, but people don't understand that some of these contracts require you to hold a policy for 5 or more years,
Right.
5, 8, sometimes even 10 years. You have to keep that policy in place after you've performed the work. So it's not just the limits of the insurance that's important, but also the term in which you're required to keep that policy in place. And those of us know these policies are expensive. I mean, it's a major expense for us annually to maintain these insurance policies. But I know, John, if you want to say anything else on the insurance, I can move on. But
I just have a question for you, Nate, because yeah, you're right. This is something that we encounter, and it's like when you're pursuing a project and you're trying to figure out, okay, what's my budget for this project? How much do I need to charge? And then you get this insurance requirement, and it's like, wow, that's more than our limit. Okay, is it worth paying up our limit to, perform this project? Can I get them to lower their requirement, or if not, I have to increase my limits and there's a bigger premium, they don't quote you out 5 years.
No,
know?
that's right.
So,
Five years.
how do I budget that? How do you
Yeah.
guys handle that?
Well, first of all, rights negotiation. So we have found a lot of times it's our client's attorney, and the attorneys are saying, "Hey, from now on, general liability on all of our insurance for our COI, certificate of insurance that's issued, are these limits. We need to up our limits." And a lot of times it's driven by risk mitigation, right? So there's someone on the other side who's trying to mitigate risk through an insurance policy, and that requirement's there. So a lot of times the first thing we try to do is negotiate. Because we're not designers and we're often just documenting existing conditions, right? So a lot of times we get lumped into that civil engineer, that structural engineer, the architect who's doing design work. We just put in that general category, which those limits understandably could be a lot higher because the liability's there. So that's the first place that we try to do is negotiate it down, and then try to see if we can fit it into the cost and scope of the work. But it's definitely something, like I said, we could almost do a whole webinar. And you think about the insurance limits, there's all different kinds, right? So not only is it workers' comp, but it's liability. Do you have vehicles? We have to show that we have the proper insurance for vehicles. Do we have drone pilots? So we have to have a whole separate policies. And then we find out that our underwriter for insurance won't go to that limit. And then we have to go to a different provider to get an umbrella policy to cover even more. And then once you start stacking these certificates, now they start auditing you and looking at how many certificates they've issued and even have enough to cover the amount of projects. So
one thing we're starting to see, Nate, is and this wasn't until recently, cyber insurance is now starting to be required on some of our contracts. I haven't seen that before until this year. So I know that's becoming a really big thing. People are getting hacked. There's damages being done. And that's a whole other cost.
Yeah, in fact, we got issued, we did get issued a letter from one of our other providers who did get hacked. And and then they're providing, the insurance for monitoring, credit monitoring for how many years. Once you've had, and that goes back to Derek, his comments on storage. What if there is a breach of the storage and your data, and then you got to notify all your clients that we've had a data breach. And sometimes we sign, non-disclosure agreements that data can't get out. And then how does that affect an NDA? The other thing I would piggyback on Derek's comments is one of our most challenging things is access. And that's what he said. When you're working in a occupied building with multiple tenants, with lots of different uses, and you're tasked with capturing all of that information for a building, access becomes critical. Do you have a key? What do you do when the door's locked? Is it an elevator machine room that requires a certified elevator technician to even open the door? We do a lot of medical facilities, medical office. There's HIPAA regulations that come into play. And is that a part of the contract too? So that goes back to the contract. HIPAA is a big deal. What about the privacy violations? And is that covered in the contract? And those can create significant delays in capturing on-site information where your crew's there, you go there and you get to a tenant space and they won't let you in.
Right.
And you got to come back. So those need to really be identified in the contract. Like Derek said, if you experience delays on site, how's that handled in the contract? Anyway, I talked a lot. You guys go.
No, this is all great information.
And I derailed your original question, Larry. So sorry.
Well, we never got to, but we're going to transition now to actually being in the field and information that many of us have gotten that from the client that didn't quite line up once we got there. So like Derek, you had worked on the Superdome, which is where we had our last Super Bowl in New Orleans. And you got some information from a client. You want to talk a little bit about that and then how that influenced your work?
Yeah, we were on that project for almost 2 years. It was the full renovation they were doing to get ready for the Super Bowl. Again, kind of also on a separate note, dealing with the NFL and the NFL schedules, coordinating around when things are closed and the amount of logistics that go into working on a live stadium as it relates to laser scanning and things like that. A lot of it is third shift. So you're coming in at night. So a lot of that security. So all of that stuff, again, that's something that needs to be put in the contract because third shift is not the same cost for anybody. Whether they're employing people to be there with you in third shift or you and your crews are going to be there. So that is something that needs to be incorporated into the contract. We do put that in ours, knowing on some jobs we will have to be there in third shift. But yeah, kind of going back to what you were saying, so the interesting thing, and I'll share my screen here. The interesting thing on this project specifically is that we saw scan data from multiple directions. So initially, the ownership paid for someone to come out and scan and then build the 3D model from that scan data. And then that was provided to the GC and the design team with a model. It was supposed to be accurate. And as we started coordinating with that model, and then we received the scan data, we realized there were things missing. So you can see
Mhm.
just from this example here, this entire catwalk, we had a lot of duct work going through this space. Some of this was being demoed, some of it was being left in place, but we didn't have any of this information. So we were told, here's the existing model, and it's got everything in there per the scan data. And then we came in there and found that was not the case. So they actually
Yeah.
did have to go back out, the GC did. They had to go back out and kind of field verify some of this. They did not choose to rescan any of it, but they had to verify that the scan data was also true. The other thing we did find with that scan data is there were years, almost like years in the lapse between when the scan data was done, when the model was done, and when it was all provided to us. So some of the things that were in the scan data by the time we started coordinating was already demoed. So that provided a little bit of a challenge as well, not knowing what do we trust at this point? Do we trust the scan data? Do we trust the model? Do we trust what they're telling us in the field? So that would be something that you would want to make sure is being kept accurate throughout a project.
Yeah,
Um,
so many clients they tell you they've got all the information in an old set of drawings or in an old set of data, and then it honestly it becomes a process of eliminating 1,000 mistakes,
mhm.
that's in that data, and how do you make the decision on whether or not you go ahead and use what the crap they gave you, or you start from scratch? That's. So with this situation, did you start from scratch or did you kept going through trying to eliminate mistakes?
What we ended up having to do is almost coordinate as if it wasn't there or it wasn't going to be there. So that was agreed that if we had ductwork that was now being routed across this catwalk, it was agreed we could put it there and there would be field modifications for that. So
Mm.
we were essentially allowed to disregard the lack of the model having that or the model missing it, and also disregard the fact that we did have the scan data, but it was almost like don't look at it too hard, because this is one of those cases where nobody really wanted to take ownership of that scan data because it was kind of passed around, and then again it was somebody else's data.
And
So
Derek,
that.
your role, you're not just scanning and doing scan to BIM, you're helping all the way through the facility management process of creating a live model, right?
We were on this project for the Superdome, we were doing all the BIM coordination. So
Mm-hmm.
we were trying to understand what was our single source of truth of what was out there. So we were getting this information, we were getting subs that were, boots on the ground saying, no, it's not there, or it is there. So that was hard to kind of understand.
Nope. Derek froze.
No.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Is this a good time to talk about technology changes, Larry?
I
Challenges?
think so.
Larry, what's in our
that?
contract with Derek if he freezes on
We
screen?
we got Derek back.
Does he have insurance?
Sorry, I must have lost connection there for a second.
That's all right.
Um,
We all have experienced that. But John, you brought up a good point while Derek was froze for a second. The changes in technology uh, is a good idea. I still want to get to that whole when do you have targets and when you don't have targets, and when do you need to add control question in the field. But please, John, go right ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, that decision it really probably hinges more on the provider. It's a professional judgment as to a lot of times whether it should be employed or not. In other cases, it's absolutely needed. Like if you want to geolocate your data, obviously you got to have some kind of control for that, and you need to be licensed to do that. But on smaller projects, the technology's gotten pretty good now. A lot of times you can run without control. It just depends. Um, and again, like the LOA spec is written such that those kind of decisions really, provide provide an outcome that you want, specify the accuracy that you're looking for, depend on the professional to determine the means and methods to achieve that accuracy is the philosophy behind the LOA spec. But if you are using control, let me do another screen share here. Hang on.
While you're bringing that up, John, too, it goes back to what you said originally is, we keep that, first of all, keeping that end in mind, and then really defining the scope of work as a part of the contract. So in the scope of work, define whether or not there needs to be control. And a lot of this, if the end in mind is to go into a system with your digital twin that requires it to be located, Esri is a great example of uh, everything in Esri is pretty much located, which is used by most municipal organizations and a lot of educational institutions that requires location and requires that. So again, defining the scope of work is really critical. And then what coordinate system is it that they need to go to?
Yeah, absolutely. It does need to be defined in the contract because there's a great opportunity for an unmet expectation, right? You can do just regular targets. It could be a paper target. It could be something that's more of a permanent target. It could also be, we've used these high precision discs where maybe you're going to be coming back and doing multiple scans over time. So you want to be able to reoccupy control points, and you want to have a certainty that those are not moving or changing. So these high precision discs, you can put a target sphere on, and they're magnetic. They'll clip right back into place. You can have it shot in with a total station using a prism that clicks onto that exact spot. So these are great when you're doing a lot of repetitive scanning. But oftentimes you can go targetless. The software's gotten really good at that now. So Nate or Derek, how do you guys make those decisions?
there's some the technology is getting so good. There are so many great things, and the cost is constantly coming down. So there's some other things that we're looking at too with control, and there's different manufacturers and different equipment that are doing some really interesting things with GIS and being able to do location and to be able to quickly create ground control when it may not even be required, but it will help in the registration of the point cloud and getting things tighter. And it may not even be a part of the contract to locate the data, but using control helps us create more accurate data relative to itself, and sometimes faster, rather than doing these cloud to cloud solutions. But like you said, it's crazy how much testing and new technology and trying to keep up with where it's coming and who's got the best technology. It's just an exciting time, really. It's fun to be a part of it. I will go back to the contract. I was thinking about some other things, and John and Derek might want to weigh in on this, but I was thinking about contracts. Defining the scope. Using USIBD's LOA really helps with defining scope and defining accuracy. It's critical to do that. What happens if there is a dispute and there is a problem? And is the contract that's being used outline what happens when there is a dispute? Not just the verification of the data, but what about mediation? What about arbitration? What are the legal remedies of the contract and what's in place there? And also limiting liability within your contract. So one thing that we always do is try to limit the liability of the contract to the amount of the job, because we talked about insurance and our limits can be 2, 4, 6, 10. What are the millions of dollars that we put in our contracts for insurance limits? But can we reduce the liability? I mean, if you do a contract that's 20, 30, 50,000, can you reduce the liability in the contract to the amount of the contract? So we always try to do that. Now it becomes negotiable, right? So sometimes our clients don't like that and they want it to be the liability to the insurance limits or beyond the insurance limits. So it's that is very important. And then what are the remedies? Because mediation is the least expensive, then arbitration, and then of course full on liability. So those are other things in the contract that are negotiable. And then you end up with a 40-page contract. Who has the time to go through and always hire an attorney to go through that contract? I will say ChatGPT is amazing for helping us understand these large contracts that we receive from other clients too. Is being able to feed in a document into ChatGPT and then start to ask questions of it. What are the different things that we are agreeing to that could be a red flag in this contract?
That's a really cool idea, because the language often is really confusing. And when somebody hands you their contract to sign.
That's a really good point, Nate, about trying to limit your liability, because if you can get it limited to the value of your contract versus the limits of your policy, if there is a claim, and if you do have to use your policy, and if you find yourself in the unfortunate situation of having to use your policy to pay out on that claim, if it's a higher limit and the higher the dollar amount, you're going to see your premium shoot way up after that event, or you may become uninsurable even. And that can stay with you for a number of years past that claim. So it's important to look at those things.
I want to try something fun here. What was the most tense situation in your career that you ran into that you thought was going to trigger like your biggest insurance payout if things went wrong. Uh, I myself had two situations, but I'll mention one, like where I was inverting a scanner head over a glass dome in a state capitol building. And I'm like, if this thing falls through the glass dome, I'm screwed. This will max out my insurance. Did any of you guys ever have a situation like that, and maybe even a claim that you ended up having when you were younger that you couldn't foresee?
I'll
We
tell you, I'm nervous every day that we fly a drone
Oh, when you
because
fly a drone, yeah.
I mean, like you suspending the scanner, those drones are in the air flying every day. And I'm always worried that one's going to fall out of the sky. So that insurance policy is one that I very much review and very much am concerned about almost every day. And it's just, we do everything that we can. We have training courses for the drone. Our pilots are certified FAA. We make sure our insurance policy is in place. Make sure that the guy that's flying the drone is always line of sight. Make sure that the drone itself has the technology in it to for object detection. So but that is one. I'll tell you, that's one that makes me nervous all the time because it's
Yeah.
in the air, and if it falls out of the sky and God forbid that somebody gets injured, causes a car accident, causes something else. That one makes me nervous all the time. So I hate to say that in a webinar publicly, but
No.
that
Very,
definitely is
very
something that
valid.
makes me
Somebody
nervous.
tries to catch that drone and gets cut up or whatever. That's yeah. Anybody else? I'll tell
I
you one. Oh, go right ahead, Derek.
Yeah, I mean it wasn't an equipment maybe issue. We actually scanned inside a jail, a live
Uh,
jail, and at certain points, just because of timing, we always had security with us, but I mean you had inmates walking by you, and just that was just a little unique of a situation to be in as we were laser scanning the inside of the jail. But yeah, it wasn't something that, like I said, had anything to do with equipment or anything, but it was a different atmosphere.
yeah. One last point I'd like to make for a lot of people out there. There are certain categories that will uh, increase your insurance if you're not careful, like working on bridges or condos. Um, you need to check with your insurance company that if you take that job, they're not going to suddenly triple your insurance for the next 3 years or more. So that's something that's worth thinking about on some jobs. Uh, Anybody else?
The question in the chat is, are we saying a team of two? And our answer is yes. So we always have an observer and a pilot. A lot of times, if depending on what you're flying for, sometimes you have two pilots. So one guy's flying the drone, the other guy's controlling the camera. Depending on if we're doing cinematic type things for marketing purposes, you can often have two operators of the drone. We also personal protection equipment for your employees is also really important. The contract will stipulate that too, a lot of times, especially workers' comp. So that's almost always a line item in the insurance is that when we issue a COI is the workers' comp insurance. And because we're in all different types of buildings, we scanned a building that was vacant and had been vacant for 20 or 30 years. Just the amount of dust and dirt that had accumulated over time is that, just ventilation. And I mean, coming from COVID, we've all are accustomed to masks, but some of we didn't get to like self-contained breathing apparatus, but providing them for your employees. We're in mechanical rooms where you've got to have ear protection. We're in freezer buildings where the temperatures dip well below zero. And the equipment, how does it operate in the cold weather? Does your employee have winter gloves on? Do they have a heavy coat? Do they have a hat? That stuff becomes very important. Steel-toed shoes. We often have hard hats, vests. These are the personal protection equipment is also very important security clearances, like Derek, you mentioned, I think airports and stuff like that. There's a lot of that training, on-site training. Do we have to go through special safety training with your employees, with the client on the site? That's all very important to be identified into the contract too.
Yeah, if there's anybody out there in the audience that you want to chime in with some questions, now is a great time. We're getting close to the end here, and we'd love to hear from you. Also, again, I love to hear where you guys are from, so please feel free to jump in on the chat and add to the conversation.
I want to add one more thing on contracts, and Derek raised this point earlier, and that is ownership of the data and the information. So a lot of times we will work with an AIA contract where architects and copyright. So is the information, who owns it? So a lot of our contracts will actually stipulate that we own the data. We deal with a lot of buildings where the ownership changes frequently. And sometimes we're doing due diligence for somebody buying a property and they're not even the owner. So our contract is with someone who's not even the owner. They're contemplating buying this building. And what happens when that information changes hands? Can we reuse the data in the future? So we try to make sure that we own the data so that at some point in the future, when it changes hands, can we reach out to the new owner? And because we own the data, we can transfer ownership of that information or transfer a license to utilize that data for future purposes. So that comes back to the copyright information. That's also very important to define in the contract, especially today with AI. So we see all of these things where the New York Times has all of their paper information. Can it be indexed for ChatGPT? Is Google indexing YouTube? There's a ton of companies right now and educational, even with USIBD, where they're writing algorithms to automate scan to BIM, automate scan to CAD. And how are they training these models? Are they being trained on data that they own? Matterport is a great example. Who owns the Matterport data? Who owns it?
Matterport.
Matterport owns it. I mean, they host and license all of that data. What are they then doing with that data? Is it being used to train models to automate scan to BIM? So that's when you use a Matterport machine, there's a contract involved. You don't think about it, but there's a contract. Who owns the data? So that's another thing that I think Derek brought up earlier that becomes very critical in our documents as to who owns the data.
That's a great point, Nate, because you brought up the whole, you're working for someone doing due diligence and they don't even own the building, right? And if the contract's written and say they don't go through with that purchase, and if now you don't own the data, someone who doesn't even own the building owns the data, I mean, that's pretty weird. Have you encountered that? And how does that work?
So, I mean, we write all of our contracts to where we own the data, first of all. And it becomes a point of negotiation a lot of times to where the client wants to own the data. So our next step in negotiating is, well, let's co-own the data. And we use that exact argument that you just said. Well, what if you don't buy the building? What if someone wants to reuse this in the future? And we usually have that conversation with the client. And our contracts are written that we own the data and that we're giving them an unlimited license to use it for whatever they want. These contracts also limit on who they can give the data to. Can they give it to their service providers? Because who owns it? Now, our contracts are an unlimited license. We don't care who they give it to or what they do with the data, but we always want to maintain some form of ownership if we can. We can't always. Sometimes it's a non-negotiable for the client is, hey, we're going to go somewhere else, where we can own all the data 100%. And so then I have to we make a decision if we're okay with that. And most likely we're okay with it. They can own the data. But then what happens if they don't buy it? And then a new buyer comes in. It's another client of ours. Can we reuse the same data, that we just collected on that same building? And a lot of times it's like we have to tell them, oh, contractually, we actually don't own that information. We have to go out and recollect it for you. And we end up doing the same job twice. That's happened to us lots of times where we have to go do it again, and because our contract prohibited us from sharing the data that we already captured. We couldn't transfer it. We didn't own it. And then there's times where we do own it and we can say, hey, we'll just do some kind of a fee because we already own all this information.
Sounds like it didn't work out so bad for you then, Nate.
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah, sometimes you do the job more than once. In fact, yesterday we were in a building that we had scanned 8 years ago. So it was funny because the guy sent me a photo of it was him. He's like, hey, we're back to the same building we did 8 years ago, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, on scanning I scanned a famous landmark at one point in my career, and I've had 2 to 3 different film companies over the years contact me and say, hey, we'd like to get that model, we'd like to get that scan data, what will it cost? And the end result was I had to tell them, sorry, the NDA was too tight on that one. I'm not allowed to reshare. I wish I was smart enough or heard you talk, Nate, and had thought about the idea of telling them, hey, I can go back out there and do it for you again. But it never really occurred to me. So great point that you made there.
Derek, have you ever run up against that? Have you guys had that issues?
Yeah, we actually had a project that had scan data. There were some registration errors, and we tried to this we kind of got all the scan data from somebody, and then we wanted to help fix the registration, and the original scanning company no longer had the original scan data. And so that would be my question to you all is how long are you required to keep all of that backup? That's something as an owner, if I lose it or, we get hacked or we lose that data, the scanning company itself, how long are you required to hold that data somewhere else in case we need it again and we lose it?
I'll just chime in real quick. The data to me is really valuable. I think at some point, so we do keep, I will say, unregistered or raw data that's much smaller. It's still compressed. And if we ever had to register the data, I could always do that. But we do keep an archival piece indefinitely. So we do have some thing and in redundancy. So not only are we keeping it indefinitely, we keep it in redundancy in case I ever had to go back to any job. Now, do I keep all those point clouds that are extracted and everything? I can't. It's so much data. I think we're way north of 100 terabytes of data of storage at this point. And it's expensive.
But that you're saying that's your workflow, but that's not a contractual thing.
That's true. We do have contracts where we don't have to keep it.
Right.
We don't have to keep that information that long. But that brings up another great point, Derek, because like Matterport, also Navis is another system to where a lot of their software, it's very costly to keep some of these photo tours and visualization tools. Farosphere, their Sphere XG line, which is coming out, they have data limits. And how long are you going to keep that available for a client? And there's a cost to it. Is it 12 months? Is it 24 months? How long do they want to have access to it? So, I mean, that's a great point of contract. Is it really should be defined in a contract as to how long you're obligated to hold on to that data.
Yeah,
we're doing one now where there is a service fee for like a monthly service fee, and we've got it for 12 months. And then if the owner wants to continue it beyond that, then that's something that we need to talk about at that point. But we've put a limit on it because you're right. I mean, we would have to hold on to that service, platform for who knows how long.
Yeah, those hosting fees can be, I mean, that's a data, that is people's business models today, right? They're counting on that revenue. They're counting on you hosting that data, software as a service, right?
Mhm.
Well, guys, this has been a lot of fun. I'm afraid we're out of time for this session. I enjoyed spending my lunchtime with you guys, and I really appreciate you guys logging on and talking us through some of these really important points. Thank you to all of our attendees. We appreciate you spending your time with us, and uh, I look forward to talking to you all next month when we go over some more great topics. Well, everybody, have a great afternoon. Get out there and go scan something.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you all.